It began on an ordinary Tuesday morning, although nothing that followed could be called ordinary. In March 1984, the headquarters of the KGB's First Chief Directorate in Yasenevo received an encrypted message from their Residentura in Vienna. At first glance, it looked like a routine report, but the message was missing something critical. The confirmation code from Agent Sokol. Sokol, real name classified even decades later, had been one of the KGB's most valuable deep-cover operatives in Western Europe. For years he supplied Moscow with microfilm documents, diplomatic memos, and fragments of intelligence intercepted from NATO communication channels. He was calm, disciplined, and impeccably reliable, and that was why the missing code triggered immediate panic. Colonel Yuri Mikhailov, head of counterintelligence operations in Europe, ordered a preliminary check. Maybe Sokol was delayed, maybe he was avoiding surveillance. But as the hours passed, the silence became more suspicious. At 1940, the Vienna Residentura confirmed the worst. Sokol had not shown up to his scheduled signal drop, and his safe house was untouched, as if he had simply walked out and evaporated. Officially, the KGB never lost agents. Unofficially, it happened. And when it happened, there were only two explanations: defection or capture. Both were equally dangerous. In Moscow, a crisis team assembled behind closed doors. Mikhailov pored over every detail of Sokol's last months. His assignments, his contacts, the subtle changes in his writing style. No signs of instability, no money issues, no suspicious behavior. But something else caught his attention. 2 weeks earlier, a CIA operative in Vienna named Richard Hale had unexpectedly disappeared from CIA communications logs. The Americans were behaving strangely, pulling people out of Europe, closing operations without explanation. It was subtle, too subtle for most analysts, but Mikhailov noticed. What if they know? He said quietly. What if Sokol has been compromised and the CIA is repositioning assets? Inside the KGB, the possibility was terrifying. If the CIA had captured Sokol, they might already be extracting operational secrets, safe houses, dead drops, cooperators, communication codes. If that information leaked, half of the KGB's network in Western Europe could collapse overnight. But there was one more possibility, one that no one in the room dared to say aloud. What if Sokol wasn't captured? What if he crossed the line willingly? The room stayed silent, heavy with the weight of unspoken conclusions. They all knew the consequences. If he defected, the CIA would shield him, interrogate him, and then exploit him as a propaganda weapon. The KGB would deny everything, of course. But internally, it would be a disaster. The men in the room exchanged glances. Mikhailov closed the dossier and said, "We find him, alive or dead." Before the Americans make their move, what Mikhailov didn't know, what no one in Moscow could know, was that the CIA was already 3 steps ahead. Weeks before Sokol's disappearance, the agency had intercepted traces of Soviet communication suggesting an internal leak. Not a defector, a mole, and the CIA believed Sokol was connected to that mole, perhaps unknowingly. So while the KGB was searching for a missing agent, the CIA was searching for something else entirely, a pattern. And in that pattern, Sokol was only the beginning. Langley, Virginia, the kind of place where no window was truly transparent and no conversation truly private. Deputy Director Harold Whitmore entered the operations wing with a folder tucked under his arm. He had already read the report twice on his way from the parking lot. By the time he reached the secure briefing room, he practically knew it by heart. Inside, 2 analysts, Cooper and Ramirez, were reviewing audio transcripts from Vienna. They straightened as Whitmore entered. "You're sure it's him?" Whitmore asked without sitting. Ramirez nodded. "Positive. Voice print analysis matches Agent Sokol with 97.8% certainty. The recording was made 48 hours before he vanished." Whitmore finally took a seat. "Play it." A sterile click, static. Then a voice, calm, controlled, unmistakably Soviet. "Sokol, if anything happens, you will know. They're watching the wrong man." The recording ended abruptly. Cooper paused the tape. "That's all we intercepted. No location markers, no follow-up." Whitmore leaned back, thinking. For a man who was supposedly a loyal KGB asset, Sokol sounded far too collected for someone about to run. Either he wasn't afraid, or he had already accepted his fate. "What do we have on the KGB's reaction?" Whitmore asked. Cooper switched to another file. Their Vienna Residentura increased internal traffic by 30%. Moscow ordered a lockdown on all Soviet diplomatic personnel within 12 hours of the missed code. That level of mobilization only means one thing. Whitmore finished the sentence for him. "They think we grabbed him." But the CIA hadn't. Not yet, at least. And that was the strange part. While the Soviets were panicking, the CIA was merely observing. Because they already knew something the KGB didn't. Sokol had been under silent surveillance for 3 months. It hadn't been Whitmore's idea, yet the initiative came from counterintelligence after a pattern. Analysis revealed anomalies in Sokol's network. Not mistakes, not leaks, but oddities. Dead drops moved without instruction. Encrypted messages sent from unauthorized locations. Timestamps that didn't align. Nothing big enough to expose him, but enough to trigger suspicion. Whitmore tapped the table. So Sokol was being watched. But we didn't take him. Which means someone else moved first, Ramirez said. There weren't many players in Vienna capable of doing that. The KGB, the CIA, or a third far more dangerous category, an internal Soviet hunter unit. Cooper slid a new document across the desk. There's more. 48 hours before he disappeared, Sokol met with a man we still haven't identified. The meeting lasted 12 minutes. No audio, only a grainy visual. And the man avoided every surveillance point afterward. Whitmore examined the blurry still frame. The stranger wore a long coat, hat pulled low, and moved with the kind of confidence that came from training. Serious training. Could be KGB, Cooper said. Could be, Whitmore replied slowly. Or someone they no longer control. A long silence filled the room. Then Ramirez said what they were all thinking. If Sokol wasn't taken by us and he didn't come willingly, he might be running from the KGB, which means he knows something. Whitmore nodded. Something valuable enough to make Moscow nervous. Valuable enough to justify tracking him across Europe. He closed the folder. Put every asset in Vienna on silent alert. No aggressive moves. I want eyes on the Soviets, not on Sokol. Cooper raised an eyebrow. So we let the KGB find him? Whitmore shook his head. No, we let them try. He stood and gathered the files. Because whatever they're chasing, I intend to find it first. At that moment, no one in the room knew that. Sokol was already far from Vienna, and that both the CIA and KGB were now playing catch-up in a game. Sokol had started long before either side realized they were involved. Sokol had never intended to run, at least not until the night everything changed. 2 days before his disappearance, he sat alone inside a dimly lit cafe on Maria Hilfer Strasse, blending in with the late evening crowd. His posture was relaxed, his face calm, but inside, calculations unfolded. With the precision of a man who understood that one wrong step could erase him from existence. Across the street, a payphone rang. It rang twice, then a third time. The signal. Sokol stood, left a few shillings on the table, and walked out without looking back. He picked up the receiver. A voice he didn't recognize spoke softly. They've opened your file. You have 72 hours. Move carefully. The line died. No explanation. No code phrase. No signature. It couldn't have come from headquarters. KGB communications never used open lines. And CIA cutouts never warned Soviet agents of danger, which meant the caller belonged to neither side. Sokol walked quickly toward the U-Bahn, mind racing. Someone inside the KGB had indeed touched his file. He had sensed it a week earlier when his handler asked questions that were off, too vague, too careful. Questions designed not to reassure him, but to provoke a mistake. He hadn't made one, but someone wanted it to look as if he had. That was when he made the decision he swore he would never make. He retrieved the notebook. It was hidden behind a cracked tile in the wall of an abandoned storage room beside his apartment basement, a place he visited only once a year. Agents were forbidden from keeping written records, and Sokol understood why. But his work involved complex movements, overlapping signals, rotating dead drops, and 3 separate ciphers for contact points. Any one of them could shift without notice. His memory was sharp, but he wasn't arrogant enough to rely on it entirely. The notebook wasn't a diary. It was a tool, coded, scrambled, nearly indecipherable without the key inside Sokol's mind. Still, it was dangerous enough that possession of it would be viewed as treason by Moscow. He opened it now, flipping through the pages he himself had written over 4 years. He stopped at a series of entries from the previous month, details he barely remembered adding, a meeting he hadn't requested, a location he never used, a time he never signed off on, but written in his own handwriting, except it wasn't his. Someone had replicated his style, almost perfectly. The spacing was a fraction off. The angle of the pen pressure slightly wrong. To anyone else it would look identical. To him, it screamed sabotage. He sat on the cold concrete floor and tried to connect the clues. Someone inside the KGB was manufacturing evidence to frame him as a compromised agent. But why? And who would benefit? He scanned the notebook again. 3 entries stood out, each linked to a single code name, Gromov. Gromov wasn't his handler, wasn't connected to Vienna, wasn't even part of Sokol's directorate. He was a senior figure in Directorate K, Internal Security, the very branch responsible for identifying traitors. If Gromov wanted Sokol gone, it was for a reason far more serious than routine suspicion. The next morning, Sokol carried the notebook under his coat and took a long detour through a crowded shopping district to shake any tails. When he finally stopped, it was in front of a nondescript building near the canal. Inside, he found the man from the blurred CIA surveillance photo, the stranger he had been seen meeting 2 days earlier. His name was Anton Lebedev, and he wasn't CIA. He wasn't Vienna police. He wasn't even officially alive. He was part of a secret internal KGB audit group, a ghost unit created to investigate corruption within the service itself. Lebedev looked up from the table. "So you finally understood," he said. "I understood someone wants me buried," Sokol replied, placing the notebook on the table. "I want to know why." Lebedev opened the notebook carefully. "Because you were getting close to something that was never meant to be found." He turned one page, then another. He stopped at the forged entries. "This," Lebedev said, "is only the beginning." Before Sokol could respond, Lebedev pulled out a second document, a photocopy of a message sent from Moscow weeks earlier. A message ordering Sokol's neutralization, signed by Gromov. Sokol felt his pulse slow. His training took over. "They want to kill me. But why fabricate evidence first?" Lebedev closed the notebook. "Because the evidence isn't meant for Moscow," he said quietly. "It's meant for the CIA." Sokol froze. "To make it look like I defected?" "No," Lebedev replied. "To make it look like you were the mole feeding the CIA information." Sokol felt the room tilt slightly. He whispered, "But I'm not the mole." Lebedev nodded. "I know, which is why they need you gone. Because you were getting close to discovering who the real mole is." Snow was falling when Sokol and Lebedev left the safe flat near the canal. Vienna looked peaceful. Christmas markets, warm lights, tourists with cameras. No one could guess that 2 men were walking through the city, knowing that the KGB had already signed one of their death warrants. They moved separately, crossing streets at different times, meeting again only inside a narrow service corridor behind an old hotel. Lebedev checked his watch. "You have to understand something," he said. "Once Gromov marks a man as a threat, he doesn't stop. Evidence? No evidence. It doesn't matter. You're already guilty in his eyes." Sokol kept his voice steady. "What exactly was I getting close to?" Lebedev hesitated. He had spent most of his career inside invisible structures of Soviet intelligence, auditing, cleaning, erasing. But now, for the first time in decades, he looked uncertain. "The leak," he said finally. "The one the KGB pretends doesn't exist." Sokol's pulse quickened. "You're saying the mole is real?" Lebedev nodded. "And whoever he is, he's not low level. He has access to information that only 7 people in Moscow can reach. Your notebook, the forged entries, they were designed to frame you, to redirect suspicion, to create noise." Sokol leaned against the cold concrete wall, absorbing the implications. "And the CIA? Do they know there's a mole inside Moscow?" "Not yet, but they're close." Lebedev pulled out another sheet, a grainy surveillance still showing a CIA courier receiving a package in Munich. This was intercepted by our monitoring station. The courier never reported the pickup. The Americans hid it even from their own embassy. Meaning? Meaning they got something valuable. And they don't want anyone to know who gave it to them. Sokol frowned. "You think the mole contacted them directly?" "I think someone in Moscow is playing both sides," Lebedev replied. "And they needed a scapegoat. Someone expendable. Someone who could be accused without raising suspicion inside the Politburo." Sokol pressed his hands against his temples. Pieces were starting to align, too perfectly. "This mole," Sokol said slowly, "what does he want?" Lebedev closed his eyes for a moment. "Power, protection, maybe money. But more than that, he wants to survive the internal war happening in Moscow." "Internal war? You've been in the field too long. Sokol, you haven't seen what Moscow has become. Directorates fighting each other. Senior officials making deals with businessmen and criminals. Loyalty becoming a currency. And Gromov? He's trying to consolidate control. If he exposes a high-level mole under his command, he becomes untouchable." Sokol exhaled sharply. "Unless the mole exposes him first." Lebedev nodded grimly. Before either man could say more, a soft buzzing vibrated from Lebedev's pocket. A coded beeper, old Soviet tech, but reliable. He glanced at the tiny screen, and his expression stiffened. "They found us?" Sokol asked. "They don't think, they fear," Lebedev corrected him. "And fear is dangerous. They'll grab you before the KGB does." Sokol paced the narrow corridor. "So what's your plan? Hide me forever?" Lebedev shook his head. "No, my plan is to force Gromov into the open. But I can't do it without evidence. And you think I have it? I think you might have stumbled onto it without realizing." Lebedev opened the notebook again and pointed to one line. An address. Sokol didn't remember writing. "You saw something here. Something they don't want anyone to see." "What's at that address?" Sokol whispered. "A private archive used by Directorate. K, a place for files too. Sensitive to store in the main building." Sokol understood instantly. "If Gromov forged entries in my notebook, then the originals, the proof, must be in that archive." Lebedev nodded. "And that's why we must get there first." Sokol swallowed. "You're suggesting we break into a KGB archive? In Moscow?" "Not break in," Lebedev said. "Retrieve what you already saw." Sokol stared at the address on the page. It was a dead zone. No embassies, no watchers, no official surveillance. Exactly the kind of place a traitor inside the KGB would use to hide incriminating material. "And what if the CIA reaches it first?" Sokol asked. "They won't," Lebedev replied quietly. "Because they don't know what they're looking for." Sokol closed the notebook. "When do we leave for Moscow?" Lebedev checked the corridor one last time and whispered, "We're not leaving." "The archive isn't in Moscow." Sokol froze. "Where is it?" Lebedev met his eyes. "In Vienna. 2 kilometers from here." The building didn't look like a KGB archive. It looked like a forgotten warehouse. 3 floors, cracked windows, a rusted service door, a place no one would visit unless they had a reason, which was exactly why Directorate K used it. Sokol and Lebedev approached from different directions, blending into the late-night traffic. The neighborhood was quiet, industrial, empty, ideal for an operation that needed to stay invisible. Lebedev entered first, using a key that should not have existed outside Moscow. Sokol slipped in 30 seconds later. Inside smelled of dust, old paper, and cold metal. Half the lights were dead. The other half flickered. "This way," Lebedev whispered. They moved down a narrow concrete hallway lined with unmarked doors. Nothing suggested that the most sensitive internal files of the KGB's counterintelligence directorate were stored here. Things too incriminating to ever travel by official channels. Finally, Lebedev stopped at a reinforced door. "This is it. Keep watch." He pulled out a small toolkit, wired a device to the magnetic lock, waited for the faintest click, and eased the door open. Inside were shelves stacked with unnumbered folders. No catalogs, no clear system. Pure chaos designed deliberately, so that only the person who created it could find anything quickly. Lebedev's flashlight swept across labels until he froze. "Here," he whispered. He pulled a slim gray folder from the second shelf. The label read, "Operation Ferlin, Internal Risk Assessment." Sokol felt a chill. Ferlin was the name of his long-term intelligence channel, but he had never seen this file. Lebedev opened it. Inside were surveillance photos, not of Sokol, but of meetings he never attended. False meetings, false contacts, false signals. Gromov manufactured everything, Sokol said quietly. He built a full profile of a traitor. That's not all. Lebedev flipped another page. A second set of photos showed an American officer receiving documents. But the man delivering them wasn't Sokol. The man was someone Sokol recognized, a senior KGB communications specialist, a man with unrestricted access to codebooks, signal schedules, and transmission logs. Lebedev whispered the name. Solovyov. Sokol felt the air leave his lungs. Solovyov had been inside the KGB for 25 years, respected, untouchable, and now he was in photographs, passing documents to the CIA. "No wonder they needed you gone," Lebedev said. "You were assigned to audit the Vienna signals rotation. If you finished, you'd have found the discrepancies that point to him." Sokol tightened his jaw. "And Gromov?" Lebedev handed him a final page, a memo signed by Gromov himself, authorizing the creation of decoy intelligence channels to divert suspicion. "He covered for Solovyov," Lebedev said. "Protected him, maybe even worked with him." A distant sound made both men freeze. "Boots!" Concrete. 4 or 5 men. Sokol's mind raced. "They followed us." "No," Lebedev corrected softly. "They followed you." He shoved the folder into Sokol's hands. "Take it. This is proof of the mole, of the frame job, of Gromov's corruption. If the KGB gets it, you're dead. If the CIA gets it, Moscow collapses internally. And you? Sokol whispered. Lebedev smiled faintly, the first human expression Sokol had seen from him. Someone has to slow them down. Before Sokol could stop him, Lebedev stepped into the hallway. Shouts, flashlights, then the echo of a struggle. Sokol slipped out the back entrance, moving through cold air that bit into his lungs. He crossed the street, turned twice, doubled back, changed direction again. His training took over. His mind remained cold. He didn't stop until he reached the river. Only then did he open the folder again. Inside was everything: Solovyov's treason, Gromov's cover-up, the forged case against him, the signals that proved Sokol had never contacted the CIA, evidence that could destroy the careers and lives of men who controlled entire sections of Soviet intelligence. But who could he trust with it? The KGB would bury him. The CIA would exploit him. Both sides wanted the truth, but neither wanted him to survive it. Sokol stared at the dark water below and understood the simple, brutal truth. He had no country anymore. He closed the folder, tucked it beneath his coat, and disappeared into the night, not as a Soviet operative or an American asset, but as the only man who knew the entire story. Neither the KGB nor the CIA would ever publicly admit it, but in the months that followed, both silently adjusted operations in Europe. Signals changed, handlers vanished, and a quiet, uneasy fear spread through both agencies. Because somewhere out there was a man carrying the truth, and both sides knew whoever found Sokol first would control the future of the Cold War.